Hello, today is September 11th, 2018. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. I have not looked at the agenda yet. If somebody else wants to moderate real quick.
Well, I just added one item. It's about the Kubernetes Anywhere change. I want it unblocked and reviewed so that we can merge it today. Ilya added a comment that we need docs for this, and I kind of disagree with him. He basically wants to document how to download the latest corrected weave, and I think that we shouldn't document anything there. Just get change.
I wholeheartly agree. This Kubernetes Anywhere is not a maintained thing, and in 113, I want to kill it with fire. So we're only doing this because we have to, and we found an issue with the automation.
Yes, I've been debugging with Fabrizio, and I think this particular PR in its current state is kind of good. I think we should deploy it and test it.
Yes, we need to update the PR to test infra once this is merged.
So one of the changes I made with help from Ben was that we no longer do that. Just submitting to Kubernetes Anywhere is sufficient.
Sweet. Right. I can't unblock you. I think only Ilya or Robert can. At this point, I don't have ACLs to that repo.
Yeah, so that's the next thing on the agenda was let's fix the ACLs to that repo. Because as that repo is now basically just being used as an end-to-end runner for kubeadmin, and we don't want to use it for anything else, the people that are debugging it and running, maintaining those tests for kubeadmin need to just have access to it directly. I think I mentioned before that I could do that, and I haven't figured out how. If anybody knows how those ACLs are set up, otherwise I'll go start poking at GitHub.
There's an owner's file. You can just PR the owner's file.
So the bots do not work for this repo. If you type approve, it doesn't merge.
Okay, then I don't know. Then you have to, whoever's got admin rights to the repo needs to fix it.
I think Ilya told me that this is Jessica Chen from Google.
Let me see if I can check real quick.
So
I should probably have admin rights too.
Yeah, Fabrizio is one of the people who actually was able to run Kubernetes Anywhere yesterday. I couldn't because I failed at a certain point. Anyway, I think Fabrizio should have merge access at least.
So I'm not quite certain as to when or why it failed because of the whole shift that you did, Lubomir, because the history is not viewable in test grid anymore after the shift. There might be a way to do it, but it's not obvious to me.
When I started looking at the failures, it was about the change from Peter that he removed the deprecated ignore pre-flight checks. Now it's called ignore pre-flight errors. And I went back in history and I couldn't find a merge that emerged in the main repo and a merge in test infra that made sense to break this outside of our failure with the deprecated flag. And then I just went and renamed the job, and now the history is lost. But if this fixes it, we have an indication that it's CNI related.
Between your anecdotal evidence and my anecdotal evidence, we have two signs pointing to the same area, which is that the version of Weave was not running on the machines. And when I was looking and debugging stuff from the logs, which, by the way, there's a much frustration on my side with the ability to debug from the logs. Like when we built Sonobuoy for introspective detection, we grab all the pod logs as part of that too. And we don't actually have the pod logs because we had that would tell us everything. So I might, for the next version of test grid for federated testing for 113, I might kibosh all of that stuff and not even just have an integration for federated testing for periodic jobs and push that stuff forwards.
So this should be integrated as part of kubetest, I think, because currently we don't have the dump from the logs from the pods. And by the way, I started looking at this at least 2 weeks before you, and I simply couldn't figure out what's going on. It didn't make any sense to me.
Well, we knew certain order of problems that occurred, right? And just by bisecting that order, but yeah, there's not enough data. That's just a general problem, is that Kubernetes Anywhere is really hard to debug, like super hard to debug. And then it also wraps and you don't see a bunch of commands and everything else. So like because that execution is totally hidden to you, you don't see the lower level details going on, but that's only part of the problem. The other part of the problem was the ability to debug the data from the pods themselves, because if we just had that alone would have given us enough information. We have the kubelet logs, which is useful, but without the pod logs for the pods themselves, it is very difficult.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how this can be implemented. We should investigate.
So like we built this into Sonobuoy on purpose. So Sonobuoy collects all the pod logs, gives you a single tarball. We have tools to parse it. So
if we integrate Sonobuoy as part of the kubetest call,
I might even because Kubekins is a monster of weirdness. I might just talk with TestInfra to try to fix this problem. But yeah, or use federated testing with Sonobuoy, because we have our own testing infrastructure built around Sonobuoy anyways for our stuff. We might just automate that stuff to plug into federated testing with the cluster API and Kubernetes admin and just be done with it.
They might have an argument in terms of should we run Sonobuoy on everything and stuff like that. There should be a flag. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to get into that debate here, but I think for the future, debugability of anything that we try to produce is super important, because trying to bisect this problem was painful. I spent days on it on the weekend trying to understand what was happening and why.
It's also super outdated. We found that the kubectl used in the Docker container of Kubernetes Anywhere is 1.6. And I think it fails basically parsing the latest weavenet daemon set. So the idea is basically to patch this up, make a release, and we should really start thinking how to replace it.
All right, so in the meantime, I dropped some links in the notes to the GitHub groups that have write and admin access on the repo. Unfortunately, I am not a maintainer of either of those groups, so I can't modify group membership, which is a little bit annoying. So I've pinged a couple of folks to try and get such ACLs so that I can start adding other folks to those lists and clean up people that are on there that aren't active any longer. So once I get that, Tim, I'll also promote you to be a maintainer of those lists, so you can also help modify the membership. And then certainly like Lubomir and Fabrizio should be able to at least have write access, if not admin the repo as well.
Agreed.
And if someone wants to set up the merge bot, we can do that, because that'll allow us to use the owner's files. I don't know how much effort we want to put into that, since this is really hopefully just a short-term thing.
We have enough inertia, and we are planned to execute for HA Kubernetes deployments using the AWS cluster API provider within the 113 timeframe, before 113. So we're on track.
And I don't think it's a problem if people can click the merge button for Kubernetes anywhere in the meantime.
Yes, I agree. I mean, of course, we should collect reviews from more people, and people shouldn't like click the merge button on their own. Alexander, somebody submitted that's like a separate agenda item. Somebody submitted an issue at the kubeadm repo. I should dig it out. That he claims that we should support basic authentication via kubeadm join. And I saw a historical issue about this. Yeah. But I wanted your opinion on this because I think, just a second, I think that this was kind of, sorry, Robert, I messed up your, I want to post the link, just a second. Okay. So I added the link into the meeting notes. Basically, the user is saying that he is adding the basic authentication file as a volume for the API server, but then when he tries to kubeadm join with the token, he wants to provide the user and password for the basic authentication. Otherwise, he's claiming that this fails for him. Like, does anybody have comments on that?
I've seen something like this before, but it gets weird because it's totally custom to their environment.
So
I haven't seen that before, but I will look at the issue. I will comment on the GitHub.
Thanks. So to my understanding, the whole deal here is to be able to use like stuff like the dashboard. Am I correct? Because if you want to use basic authentication for the dashboard, I mean, you can set it up, but what's the point in having kubeadm join provide a user and password in that case? Like,
yeah, in general, it seems very odd, right?
So there could be a bug because we are apparently doing some verification according to the user. He's saying that the API server is failing. When
No, it looks like the join is failing because the API server is kicking back a response saying, please give me basic auth credentials to join. And I don't think that enabling basic auth should disable the token-based auth that kubeadmin join is using. And he doesn't turning that off, although he does mention turning off anonymous auth.
I agree. Like if you're using token-based authentication, it should be either or. So that way a person has the ability to do user authentication, say if they want to use the dashboard, but it shouldn't be a requirement on kubeadm because that would be weird. It kind of breaks all our workflows.
Yeah, so we probably have a bug with this. Like Robert is saying, we shouldn't like verify this or return an error when.
Well, it could be an API server bug from the sounds of it. It should be either or to pass through for auth.
Yeah, okay. So I set this up like a priority backwalk. This is not critical for 112.
even
It looks
113.
like if a user enables for basic authorization, it will be required for everything on the API server side. So it looks like join was simply not able to get the information about the cluster.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that first portion of grabbing the data.
Yeah, we discovered it to get the config map for cluster info.
If you enable basic auth, you can still use the other auth methods. Like certainly you can still use client certs, and I believe tokens as well. I mean, GKE enables basic auth and the other auth methods, and they all work in parallel. The request headers that he's seeing come back are something that's in basic auth to convince a browser to pop up a little dialog. But they should only be sent back if all of the authorization or all the authentication schemes fail. So it feels kind of like the way he's doing this is having the side effect of disabling the token-based auth that kubeadmin join is trying to use. But it's really hard to tell without sort of seeing its files or having someone try and reproduce this, whether or not that's the case.
Well, we might also have a problem is what when we're trying to fetch the config map for cluster info, we are not passing the token. That's also possible.
So I don't understand why is he setting the discovery token on safe skip CA verification fuck.
Well, I think right now it requires investigation. It's not critical for 112 release. So, if somebody wants to take it, I think it's probably a better use of our time to delegate and then have somebody investigate and then debug.
Yeah, makes sense. I just wanted to add like an item to the agenda. Does anybody have anything for like 112 specifically?
Just the tests. That's the biggest one. That's the blocker. There's a number of bugs that folks are working on to get through. I know that Chuck and Jason have updated the HA installation instructions, so more eyes to evaluate that would be helpful. Those installation instructions should be leveraging the new control plane join features. So if folks have time to verify those PRs independently, because last time the documentation was updated, but there was a tiny, tiny little typo, and we caught Twitter flack because of the typo, because somebody actually had a problem trying to do their HA deployment, and then it was only because of the way Kubernetes it has an omit empty sort of silent failure in the API machinery stuff, and because there was a minor typo, it wasn't caught until after the fact. So having people to go through the entire instruction set for setting up and deploying an HA cluster using the updated instructions, I think would be beneficial.
Yeah, I've been reviewing the PRs. I remember this was like a typo in the etcd field. I wanted to talk about the upgrade failures because I haven't looked at those at all.
Which ones? Because there was a security change to the controller manager and the defaults, and Jason has pushed a PR and that has merged. So it was kind of surprising that we caught it this late in the game and that no one did a PR to validate kubeadm stuff as part of it.
So if you go here, I'm talking about these, like the GC upgrades, and also the upgrade stable master. Like it feels like these
those have always a certain set of them have always failed.
Yeah,
that's the list that we have tried patching the skip list for, and we can't. Do you remember that from last cycle? There are a set of tests that will always fail on the upgrade portion, just because of something. Like Lucas, Jason, and I tried to fix it, and test infra. There's a bug somewhere in test infra that prevented us from actually. It ignored our skip list, like skip these tests as part of your upgrade procedure. And those tests have failed forever.
So I do see Kubernetes anywhere specific failure here. I can investigate it. But for instance, this one I have no idea what. Are you talking about that we should remove this?
Go back to the test grid real quick.
Okay.
Those 4 tests,
Yes.
the ones down below, the SIGAPs,
Mm-hmm.
stateful set upgrade, and master upgrade, and HPA upgrade, and service upgrade, those 4 tests have failed forever. Like
Okay.
since the dawn of these tests. And we tried last cycle to just remove them as part of the upgrade tests, and we couldn't because there's some bug in test infra. So we just punted and said that these are the acceptable lists of failures that can occur as part of the upgrade tests.
Yeah, and these aren't really working. I guess we kind of stayed with these being red for the whole cycle. Is that true?
Yeah, forever, yes.
I guess that's good to do for the next one.
Well, that's a test infra problem, not a test infra / test problem, not a SIG cluster lifecycle-ish problem.
Do we have an issue walked for that?
I'm sure there is one that has existed for a very long time. I'd have to dig it up. But if you put an action item in the meeting notes, I'll try and do archaeology to figure out what the root issue was.
Okay.
There's some meta topics because I wanted to use this meeting for broader SIG related stuff, which I think is useful. Like I wanted to loop in other folks who are still doing things that are in incubation and haven't really landed a home, right? I know I think Minikube is still in incubation. I don't know anymore. As well as Kube Spray, right? And to try and have a landing home for periodic conversations that are broader, right? So say, for example, a good conversation piece is that I recently updated etcd at the end of the cycle to 3.2.24 upon recommendations from, I don't want to pronounce his name wrong, but Guaiho, the last most prolific maintainer of etcd that now works for Amazon. Right. So Hung Chao and Jiyoung have moved on to other places now. And I know that Jiyoung still works on some etcd stuff, but he works, I think, at Alibaba Cloud now. Anyways, stating stuff like that is useful for folks who still have separate deployment models that are outside of the scope of inside of KK repo. So I updated all of cluster, Robert, and I also updated kubeadm as part of this. And I talked with Joe and Pivots to make sure that he was aware, and Wojtek too as well. So they were both aware.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. So stuff like that is useful to bring back into the fold. And ideally, we had this outreach originally in the beginning, where we wanted to have folks try to leverage kubeadm with inside of their other installers, because we thought that would be spread the gospel far and wide, so that way we don't constantly have multiple installers recreating the same sets of problems, right, over time. But I don't know. I think
I can't tell what you're getting at. Are you trying to figure out, should we get things like KubeSpray, Minikube out of incubation and have those be sort of SIG level projects? Are you trying to say, how do we consolidate those into the existing efforts under the SIG? I can't quite figure out what you're getting at here.
Both. I think we need to bring them to this forum to have conversation with them, to try and, just so that they're aware of things that are ongoing, and to try and make sure that we have consistency. Because usually a lot of times what happens, especially with things like Minikube, is it lags the release by a certain time frame and then updates to a certain interval, right? But they could be aware of information as it becomes available. There's other things that are ongoing with inside of Test Infra that I think might land a home as a sub-project. As other folks know, we accepted the Mirantis DIND cluster stuff as a sub-project, and it lives underneath Kubernetes SIGs org, and it's highly useful. There's a lot of people who are very active and prolific on it. There's always been one core problem, and that is that it's a ton of bash, and that people really wanted to rewrite it in Go. And Ben the Elder from Test Infra has been putting a lot of effort into what he calls kind. And the kind is underneath the Test Infra repo. And I think having general awareness of this ongoing effort and to try and, get that into a PR blocking job is highly beneficial to the SIG, because then every pull request would go through a kubeadm set of automated tests. It would basically be deployments of kubeadm in this DIND environment.
I have a couple of comments. Like, I agree about kind, and we should probably host it under sequester lifecycle. It makes perfect sense. In terms of the other projects, I don't have historical background on them, but I do see the same problem in the project as a whole. A lot of features get to an alpha state and they don't move forward. Like the only solution, like you say, Tim, is to bring the people, discuss it, and say, like, is it going outside of incubation, or like, are we basically removing them from the SIG maintenance or something?
Yeah, so KubeSpray is an interesting example because the KubeSpray folks actually came to the SIG and said, we want to get promoted from incubation to a top level repo. And this was right when the sort of steering committee was being formed and sort of a hold was put on all promotions from incubation. It was also right after COPS had been promoted. And I think those people felt a little bit burned by the process of a different project was sort of given the opportunity to get promoted and they were not given that opportunity. But now that we have a way for sort of SIGs to themselves sponsor project and we have the Kubernetes SIGs org, I think that would be a great home for KubeSpray, assuming that those folks, A, are still actively maintaining the project and keeping it up to date, and B, would be willing to join in this meeting. And I think if we can, like as Tim was saying, make this meeting more cross-cutting, less focused on sort of the specific tools and more focused on the broader issues that affect sort of all of the tools, and then over time try to start to converge the tools and reduce the delta between them. Because we do have the other sort of breakout meetings, and presumably the KubeSpray folks, if they're still active, have their own meetings of some sort as well, right? And we've got the COPS office hours is now on the SIG calendar. You have the kubeadmin office hours, the cluster API office hours. So I think that we are sort of creating separate meeting homes for each of the projects outside of this meeting, which should allow this meeting to focus on the higher level topics.
Exactly. So like with the updated instructions, for example, for high availability, like we don't want to have a fractal pattern of support, right? Where a person goes to cluster A and the installation is wildly different than if they use tool A versus tool B, or not even just the tool fragmentation, but the process fragmentation, right? Ideally, we kind of unify, sometimes some of these things get really highly opinionated, but I think as long as we have a set of requirements, those opinions can kind of go away, right? We'll rest on the requirements as the core set of things that we can agree upon. And provided that it holds true, then we should be able to, rally folks around a set of docs and processes and tools. And then we decrease the overall state space of weirdness that kind of occurs in the wild, right? Because like COPS does things wildly different than KubeSpray does. And KubeSpray has a kubeadm type of deployer, but it just doesn't have the high availability version of it, right? So, I mean, trying to unify these things over time, I think benefits everybody because it sets a base bar, and it also helps us to sort of get test automation around the core pieces that everyone depends upon.
Yeah, and this is also, I think, one of the initial sort of reasons for the SIG being formed was we did want to see some experimentation sort of outside of core about how to manage clusters, but also to start, pushing things into core where we can, like with we used to have a sort of sidecar next to the kubelet to do the certificate negotiation, and we put that into the kubelet, right? And so having that in the kubelet and be part of the sort of the standard Kubernetes distribution makes that behavior more consistent, right? And so I think that there are places like that where we can actually push things into the core components themselves to standardize things like component configuration. If we push that on top of the core components, then all of the tools get to use component configuration, and that manner of interacting with tools becomes consistent versus how do I figure out how to get cops to set this flag on the API server? How do I figure out how to get kubeadmin to set this flag on the API server, right? So I think those are the things we need to keep pushing on.
Yep, and I think maybe a little bit of outreach would help, especially I think right now we're too far into the 112 cycle for folks to try and do other things. We're heading into the home stretch. Usually during this end of cycle period, there's a lot of frantic things that come up. But in the beginning of 113, I think that's a good opportunity, and also leads into all of the conferences at the end of the year, right? Where we'll be able to, like, as we do SIG updates, we can give a more broad update of the globalized effort, as well as like try to loop folks back into the fold to feel empowered. I know that there was some hurt feelings with some of the promotions and stuff, but some of the other projects that have even been promoted, they probably don't belong at that level, right? For the long haul. And from putting on my steering hat, that we should probably rationalize some of those things to make sure that it's fair for everybody else involved.
So I have another agenda topic. That's the manifests. Manifest lists? Should we discuss this quickly?
Sure.
So I've noticed that we still don't have manifest lists for kubedns, and the multi-arch images are there, but we don't have manifest lists.
Did you talk to DIMS and file an issue?
Yeah, so there is an issue already, but there was some discussion, like, should we release a kubedns without manifest lists? And I said that that's a bad idea, because if somebody falls back from core DNS to kubedns on a multi-arch cluster, this is going to break for him. And I wanted your opinion on, like, should we block on this?
No, I don't think that's blocker worthy. We've implicitly stated, I don't think we've actually written it down somewhere, that we don't support multi-arch clusters. Like, if you were to support a mixed mode, I mean, you can always do it, but it's not a first-class type of thing that we recommend or support, because there's a lot of jiggery that's required in order for you to get that to work. You're basically recreating a grid is what you're doing. And there's a bunch of other semantics that come along with it that are non-trivial to support. Like, your images have to make sure that they land on the specific host, and you got to do labeling properly for matching. So there's all kinds of other things that come along with it that are totally undocumented. So
Yeah, taints, the CNI is not ready as well for multi-arch. And I made this comment to Tim Pepper in the multi-architecture issue by Lucas from a long time ago, that we are not going to document it, and we are not claiming like support for 112 in general. It's just there, but we are not announcing it in a way.
Yeah, it feels to me like we are adding support. We are sort of enabling that developer workflow and getting closer, but we are not to the point where we want to get, sort of, I would say, regular folks trying to run that as a real cluster.
yeah, heterogeneous grids are notoriously difficult, says the guy who did it for 10 years. So
Okay, that was enough for me. I'm going to let them know that this is not a blocker for 112.
Are there any other group topics?
I stuck one on there about the Zoom meetings. So Paris has been bugging me about the fact that our SIG is not following the new procedure for how Zoom meetings are supposed to work. There's basically going to be a new Zoom URL that we're going to use, which enables better moderation features. This is supposed to be something that the Kubernetes community is applying consistently across the board. I think the last email from her said that only like 2 or 3 SIGs were actually doing it, but everyone should be doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and update the calendar invites going forward with a new link that I am in the process of trying to generate with the new account that she just created for me. And Tim, I will share the credentials for that with you. We need to figure out how to share that across the rest of the folks. And I think we can create multiple URLs. So we had the problem in the past where we had like the overlapping meetings. I think we can actually create different Zoom URLs for those 2 meetings, even though they're at the same time. But I'm not positive.
That would be
do a little testing.
Nice.
But we have our own account, and we will be using that going forward instead of the cluster ops account once I finish getting it set up. Okay. So since this week meetings every other week, definitely by the time this next meeting of this happens, but hopefully by tomorrow when the Wednesday meetings happen, we'll have something in place too.
Okay, that'd be great. Also, we should probably make sure that to give some sunset period, because the way a lot of people have their reminders set up is their reminders are copied from the community calendar. So even if you update the invite, that doesn't necessarily get reflected onto their calendars. So we should probably have like an overlapping 2-week period or something like that to let people know.
So this was
how do we do that? Like, because I don't think I can sign into 2 Zoom meetings at the same time to help people to switch to the other one.
You just got to coordinate. Have somebody else.
So like at the top of the meeting notes at the, in Slack, we can also post like reminder, this is the right meeting to join.
Yeah, I think in Slack have a @channel update to say like reminder, as well as maybe start sending an email notification this week as a heads up, starting maybe after tomorrow, say like after tomorrow, starting next week, we will have blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Yeah. Once I get it set up, I can send that out. I think we are not supposed to publish the link to the meeting publicly anymore. So it will it'll be in the calendar invites for people, and we can stick it into Slack. But if you look at like the SIG pages in GitHub, they no longer have a link to the meetings.
Yeah, it was not supposed to be anything that can be easily scraped, as well as don't post it to social media.
Does that mean we shouldn't stick it on our mailing list also? Like we should say there is a
mailing list. Yeah, I think mailing list is fine. I think that's the main way people will get the information. So I think that's completely reasonable. I think they just want straight up web scrapers for other things. I know canonically that the reason why issues evolved was from social media. It wasn't from scraping. I think they're being extra precautious. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to give a heads up that was happening. And so if you try to join this meeting next time and nobody else is there, make sure you're using the right link.
Sorry, go ahead.
And update your calendar. If you're using the community calendar to copy to your local calendar, you need to delete the old one and recopy the new one.
Yeah, so what I do, I had a lot of meetings which I added manually, and then like Paris told me, go and add the whole calendar, and I realized that I now have a lot of duplicates, so I had to remove all my manually added instances, and now I just follow the original calendar. One question, so the Zoom link, are we going to have it in the agenda at least?
I think so. I think, as Tim was saying, I think we can send it up to the mailing list. I think we can stick it in the agenda. I think we can stick it in the calendar invite. I think they just don't want us to stick it on GitHub where it's web-facing or post it on social media. And if that happens, I think we're supposed to rotate the link. So we want to do that as little as possible, because as we're about to find out, when we rotate it from this one to the new one, it's going to be a rough transition, I think.
Okay, understood.
I'll let you know anytime I need somebody extra.
All right. I didn't have anything else for today. Do you have anything else on the agenda, Tim?
I think I talked about everything. I think just as a general reminder, if folks see other sub-projects in the community, please request or ask or prompt or poke or whatever cajole folks to come to this meeting, because I think it'd be beneficial for the broader efforts.
Yeah.
Okay, last call. Oh, go ahead.
To Tim and Rob, but I will probably talk to you guys online. Oh, sorry, offline. It's about KubeCon in China, 6th session.
Oh, okay. Great. Any other last topics? Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.